hold your ear.
And Romans.
Let me hold your ear.
Oh, so it's like that. That's cool. That's cool. I thought y'all was my peeps. Y'all ain't gonna have Cole to kick around no more.
For years, we laughed at Martin like it was just a sitcom. Catchphrases, crazy disguises, wild energy. But behind the comedy, something was rotting.
I developed an issue. Like, if you got an issue with me, I'm gonna be like, you know, what's up? You good?
Carl Payne, the man you knew as Cole Brown, is finally telling the truth about the bullying, the silent treatment, the manipulation, and how fame turned his so-called brother into a cold stranger.
I was there first. Like, I've been around way before him, way longer. So if anything, he would have got my leftovers.
This isn't just beef. This is what happens when someone with power starts spiraling, and the whole room pretends not to see it. To the outside world, Cole Brown was comedy gold, the sidekick who never quite got it right. He was the dude who'd walk in with a bucket of chicken, some bizarre story about his job, and that signature goofy grin. Lovable, dumb, hilarious. A character that made you laugh even when he made 0 sense. He was the perfect comic third wheel in Martin and Tommy's fast-paced chaos, the one who grounded their scenes with ridiculous charm. But while audiences saw laughs, Carl Payne, the man behind Cole, was quietly enduring a much darker reality. Before Martin, Carl wasn't some unknown. He'd already made a name for himself as Cockroach on The Cosby Show, holding his own alongside legends like Bill Cosby and Malcolm Jamal Warner. He was young, trained, and on the rise. When Martin premiered in 1992, it felt like the moment his career had been building toward. A fresh platform, a new audience, a role he could make iconic. And at first, everything felt right. The chemistry on set was electric. The cast felt like a tight-knit family. Family. That was the word everyone kept using. But that word didn't hold up. As the seasons rolled on, that sense of family slowly turned into hierarchy. Carl was no longer treated as a creative equal. He became the guy they could joke about, on and off camera. The mood shifted, the warmth cooled, and soon, the goofy character everyone adored became a mask Carl couldn't take off. By season 2, something shifted. Carl noticed that Martin Lawrence, his co-star, friend, and now executive producer, was changing. Not just fame-hungry, but erratic, moody, distant.
You and Martin did not get along. He was always undermining you and whatnot, and he picked on you real hard.
What looked like brotherly teasing on camera often turned into psychological warfare when the cameras stopped rolling. Jokes aimed a little too personal, decisions made behind Carl's back, scenes cut without explanation, days when Martin wouldn't even look at him, let alone speak to him. Carl didn't say anything for a while, because that's what you do when you're the supporting cast. You show up, you hit your marks, you take the disrespect and pretend it's just Hollywood stuff. But it didn't stop. He tried to keep it professional. He stayed focused. But even Carl admits, it got to him. There were nights he couldn't sleep, days he dreaded coming to work. And worst of all, no one stepped in. The producers didn't want to ruffle feathers. The network was chasing syndication. And Martin? He was the cash cow. Everyone else, including Carl, was replaceable. And it didn't feel right. Not anymore. The smiling fool on camera was cracking, and the man behind him was being pushed closer and closer to the edge. Carl Payne wasn't supposed to be the one to break. But on that set, he was breaking every single day.
I developed an issue. Like, if you got an issue with me, I'm gonna be like, what's up? You good?
Carl Payne tried everything to keep the peace. He wasn't looking for conflict. In his words, he had no beef with Martin. But Martin? He seemed to have a problem with Carl. One that Carl couldn't explain and no one around him wanted to acknowledge. The tension wasn't always loud. Sometimes it was silence, cold shoulders, stolen scenes, subtle digs in front of the crew, and then other times it was loud, real loud. Martin Lawrence was a comedic genius, No one's denying that, but behind the scenes he was also battling something much deeper. Carl called them personal demons. Others called it ego. Some blamed the pressure of fame, the long hours. Whatever it was, it showed up on set, and Carl was often the one who got hit hardest by it. Crew members whispered about Martin's mood swings. One day, he'd be laughing with everyone, hyping up the set. The next, he'd shut down, isolating himself, snapping at castmates, rewriting scenes, and undermining Carl's performance in real time. It got so bad that Carl sometimes didn't know if his character would even make it into an episode. Carl said he could take jokes. He could even take creative criticism. But what Martin was doing felt more personal, like he was trying to push him out.
Leave, all right? I'm a man, Gina. I'm a be all right. This is childish. I want you out. I don't even know why you're still here. Step!
Carl wasn't just upset about the disrespect. He was disturbed by how easy it was for everyone to ignore it. Because Martin was the star, the executive producer, and the face of the show. And Carl? He was just Cole, a supporting character, an easy target. There were rumors that security had to be called in a few times. Rumblings that things nearly got physical. Nothing ever confirmed, but the tension was thick enough to cut through. Carl stayed quiet publicly, but his energy started changing. Interviews got colder, jokes less frequent. He stayed on the show, but the damage was done. And as the seasons went on, fans had no idea that behind those laughs, Carl was trying not to lose his mind. Because for 5 years, Martin wasn't just acting out on set. He was falling apart, and Carl was right in the blast zone.
It was a great place to work for a long time, and then it became a not so great place to work. I keep it professional as much as I can until you step over that line. You cross the line and you come at me in a way that I can't sleep at night, or I feel like you threatening me.
By season 4, the tension on the Martin set wasn't just about Carl Payne anymore. It was everywhere. The chemistry that had made the show electric, gone. The laughter, forced. What used to feel like a tight-knit family started to feel like a war zone. And then came the breaking point. But this time, it wasn't Carl in the crosshairs. It was Tisha Campbell.
You had filed a lawsuit against him, and he said it wasn't true. How were you able to get back on track with him? Because clearly you guys have worked it out.
We worked really hard to reconnect, forgive.
Tisha, who played Gina, Martin's love interest on the show, filed a lawsuit accusing Martin Lawrence of harassment, verbal and threatening behavior. It was a legal bombshell, and when that lawsuit hit the media, Carl Payne felt a strange sense of déjà vu. Because everything she was describing, he had felt some version of it. Carl never confirmed seeing the things Tisha claimed, but he didn't have to. He'd experienced Martin's temper, the gaslighting, the fear. He knew what it was like to show up for work and feel small. And now, someone else had put it on record. That lawsuit nearly destroyed the show. Tisha refused to film with Martin. They used body doubles, edited scenes separately, and the audience, they could feel something was off. The magic was gone. And still, the producers didn't step in. Still, no intervention, no accountability, just one more season and a quiet cancellation. Martin said the show had simply run its course, but the truth? It had imploded under the weight of its own toxicity. Behind the scenes, everyone walked on eggshells. Carl tried to stay out of it, keep his head down, but you can't ignore that kind of tension. It infects everything, even the laughter. Carl didn't say much publicly when the show ended. He took his final paycheck, dipped out quietly, and didn't look back. Not for years. No wrap party, no final toast. Just a deep breath and the peace that came with finally being out of that space. But it wasn't just the show that ended. The friendships ended too. For 2 decades, Carl Payne and Martin Lawrence didn't say a single word to each other. No phone calls, no chance run-ins, no quiet reconciliation behind the scenes. Just pure, uncomfortable silence. the kind that stretches over years and hardens like concrete. Carl had made peace with it. The way he saw it, you don't chase closure from someone who never gave you respect in the first place. But then, in 2016, something happened that neither of them could ignore: the sudden death of their co-star and brother, Tommy Ford. Tommy had played Tommy on Martin, the level-headed friend with the mysterious job and the dry humor. Off-screen, he was the glue, the peacemaker. Carl says they spoke every day, or every other day at the very least. He was one of the few people in the industry Carl trusted. So when Tommy went in for knee surgery and never recovered, it broke something.
I got a call. Tommy and I, we spoke daily, if not daily, every other day. He was really a true friend. He was a good friend. He was going through knee surgery. He had knee surgery at the time, and he was going through rehab.
The man who had stood by him through all the chaos was gone. And suddenly, everything else, the old grudges, the ego, the silence, didn't feel so important anymore. The funeral was surreal. For the first time in nearly 30 years, the entire Martin cast stood in the same room. No scripts, no cameras, just pain, memories, and a sense that something had to change. Carl described it like stepping into a time machine. It really felt like we were about to shoot an episode again, he said. It was weird, but it was also necessary. That day, Carl and Martin finally spoke. No shouting, no drama. Just two grown men acknowledging that too much time had passed, and that they'd wasted enough of it. Carl later reflected on that moment and said something that stood out. "I think people grow. At the end of the day, the things you're mad about at 20-something, you don't even care about them in your 40s. You're in a whole different space." It wasn't a full-blown reunion. They didn't hug it out and skip off into the sunset. But it was something. It was closure. The process of reconciling with Martin Lawrence wasn't easy or immediate. Carl describes it as something they worked really hard to achieve. Forgiveness doesn't happen overnight, especially when there's been genuine hurt and disappointment. "We worked really hard to reconnect, to forgive," Carl explained. "This reunion is about celebration." That word, celebration, is important. After all the drama, all the pain, all the years of separation, Carl chose to focus on celebrating what they had accomplished together rather than dwelling on what had gone wrong. It takes maturity and emotional growth to reach that point. Carl could have held on to his anger and resentment forever. He could have continued to air dirty laundry and score points against Martin in interviews. Instead, he chose a different path.
I think people grow, man. You know what I'm saying? Like at the end of the day, the things you may have been mad about at 20-something, or, you felt like whatever about, it's kind of like...
The Martin reunion on BET Plus became a symbol of that healing process. Seeing the cast together again, laughing and reminiscing, was emotional for fans who had wondered for years what had really happened between them. But for Carl, the reunion represented something even more important: the ability to separate the good from the bad, to honor the positive impact the show had while acknowledging the struggles they'd all faced. "Martin called me the day after I separated to just reconnect," Carl revealed, showing that even Martin recognized the need to repair their relationship. In any case, when the cameras stopped rolling on Martin, Carl Payne had to face a sobering truth. The industry didn't care about what he'd survived. No one called to check in. No doors magically opened. There were no awards for enduring emotional on a hit sitcom. The world moved on. And for a while, Carl did too, just not in the way people expected. At one point, he left acting altogether. That's right, Carl Payne, one of the most recognizable faces in Black sitcom history, found himself selling cars just to keep the bills paid. "I wasn't too proud to hustle," he later said. "I got mouths to feed, and I'm not ashamed of that." It was a humbling period, but also a clarifying one. Without the mask of Cole Brown, Carl had to figure out who he really was, as a father, a husband, and an artist. And part of that identity was being a stepfather to Bobby Brown's son. Carl had married Malika Payne in the early 90s, right at the height of his fame. What most people didn't know was that Malika had a child, Landon, from a previous relationship with Bobby Brown. That's right, R&B's wildest voice was the biological father of Carl's stepson. But instead of drama, Carl stepped in with quiet strength. "I've been raising him since he was 5, Carl said. "And Bobby and I? We good. He used to come over. We'd joke, take turns doing the school run. Real grown man stuff." Even when his marriage hit a rough patch in 2012, when Malika briefly filed for custody and divorce, they found a way to work through it. No tabloids, no interviews, just two people figuring it out. They eventually renewed their vows and stayed solid. That kind of commitment? It doesn't happen without growth. Carl also started picking up acting work again. Smaller roles in shows like The Game, George Lopez, Young Dylan, and even Tyler Perry's productions. Bit by bit, he re-established himself. Not just as a sitcom sidekick, but as a man with range. He dove into theater, directed indie films, started mentoring young black actors through speaking engagements and film camps. One of his biggest joys, creating a safe space in Houston for kids to explore the arts. "I found myself in this industry when I was young," he said, "so it's only right that I help others do the same." And while he never chased the fame that Martin brought, he didn't run from it either. In 2024, Carl earned an NAACP nomination for his supporting role in Binge to Death, a dark comedy on MTV. He was doing it his way now. No politics, no pressure, and definitely no one controlling his spotlight. Carl Payne survived Martin, but more importantly, he built a life beyond it. One based on peace, family, and a version of success that didn't come with strings attached. For years, Carl Payne didn't say much. No tell-all interviews. No exposés. He didn't go online and air out the dirt. He could have. Lord knows he had enough material. But that wasn't his style. Carl held his peace, even when the disrespect was blatant. Even when the bullying felt like sabotage. He chose to stay focused on his craft, on his family, on surviving. But make no mistake, he always remembered. And now? Now he's finally speaking up. Not with bitterness, but with truth. Because the truth doesn't age, it just waits. From day one, Carl knew Martin was special. He felt the energy in the room. The chemistry was real. "It was lightning in a bottle," he said. "You can't fake that. You can't write that into a script. We had something rare." And that's what made the betrayal hurt even more. This wasn't just a job. It was supposed to be a brotherhood, a bond. Instead, it became a battleground. Carl was the target of a very specific kind of bullying, the kind that doesn't leave bruises but messes with your head. One day, Martin would crack a joke about him in front of the whole set, just a little too sharp. The next day, his lines would be cut without warning. Directors would say they were adjusting the script, but Carl knew what was really going on. It was death by 1,000 small humiliations. And no one, not producers, not network execs, ever stepped in. Why would they? The ratings were gold. Martin was a cultural force, and Carl Payne, he was just coal, replaceable, disposable, easy to silence. But Carl didn't quit. He showed up. He delivered. He endured. And in the process, he watched Martin unravel, slowly, publicly, and painfully. There were rumors, Martin's erratic behavior, the breakdowns, the lawsuit from Tisha Campbell, the whispers about use. Carl doesn't gloat about any of it. If anything, he speaks on it with a strange kind of sadness. "I think he was battling demons," he said. And sometimes, people take that out on the ones closest to them. Still, Carl never deserved it.
I was there first. Like, I've been around way before him. Way longer, so if anything, he would have got my leftover.
The tension between them lasted decades. Even after the show ended, even after the reunion special, even after they stood together at Tommy Ford's funeral, there were still scars. Because what Carl went through wasn't just behind-the-scenes drama. It was psychological damage. It affected his work, his relationships, his confidence. And the worst part? The world never knew, until now. Carl didn't need to destroy Martin's legacy to tell his story. He's not out here dragging anyone, but he is reclaiming the truth. The truth that behind every laugh was a man holding it together. The truth that being Cole Brown meant something, not just to the fans, but to the culture. And the truth that he was more than just comic relief. He was a survivor. Today, Carl Payne is finally getting the flowers he always deserved. Not because he played it safe, but because he stayed real. Through the good, the ugly, and the unforgettable. From The Cosby Show to Martin, from selling cars to directing films, from beefing with Bobby Brown to raising his son, Carl's story isn't just about what happened to him. It's about what he did with it. And while Martin Lawrence went on to movies and box office success, Carl carved out something more lasting: integrity, peace, and respect. In the end, Carl Payne didn't just warn us about Martin Lawrence. He warned us about what power can do when it goes unchecked, about how fame can poison a friendship, about how silence can protect, and about how healing sometimes begins when the cameras stop. He didn't have to scream to be heard. He just had to survive long enough to finally speak. Anyway, that's it for this video, folks. Bye.